Good. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're talking about a little bit of an idea about the basics of Excel. And for that, we have opened this proper example where you see some kind of tasks and an empty sheet. So the first thing I need to mention is that every cell of Excel basically is the same. And that means if you are looking at the cell with the right mouse click on every cell, you can format the cell and you can format kind of numbers, you can format the alignment for the text, you can change the font, the border, but the basic thing is general is the most common used one. So that means you can enter any number or also any text into a cell. The cell itself is defined by its column and by its row. So we see this is the cell number G6. And by saying so, there is no kind of restriction what you can enter in the cell by default. So here you see a number which is right aligned and text which is left aligned. So Excel tries to see what you have entered into the proper cells. Nevertheless, this is not changed. So if the difference is if we are now kind of putting a number inside, we could make it differently by changing the numbering format. For example, change it to a currency or have 15 and say, well, this is a percentage. And so you could change the cells by changing their numbering format. Just take into account that this is changed for the cell itself. That means even if you delete the information within the cell by pressing the delete button, the formatting is not changed. And that means if I'm now typing 1, 2, 3, 4, you see that this is not 3 anymore, but it's 3%, which equals 0.03. And that is kind of different. That means even if you change afterwards the formatting to a basic number again, it's not 3, but it's 0.03. And that is something you should be aware of. That means we are here kind of aware of this problem. And the same thing is if you have changed the formatting of a cell and then delete it, it's hard to know where are cells that have pre-formatted restrictions now. And due to the fact you can always mark all of the cells by clicking in the upper left corner and then go back to the general setting, and that takes away most of the formattings here. Another thing that I need to mention is, of course, that we have the chance of filling out informations. The one is by a drag and drop. That means if I'm saying 1, 2, and now 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you should be aware that we can mark those two cells. And after marking the two, there's a little dot in the lower right corner. If you click on that, keep the left mouse button pressed, and you drag and drop, it fills out a row or a column according to your setup. So if you say 0 and 5 and you mark it, it increases it by 5 all the time. And that's kind of nice to know and useful. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky because if you say, well, 1, 2, and now we want to fill it up unto 250, drag and drop works, but might take quite a while. So there is still the option of setting up the first number, and then you'll find in the register card of home, you'll find the filling out, and there is a filling out of a series as a possibility. And if you fill out a series, you have to define you want to see the series in the row or in the column. In our part, it's column. Do you want to have linear or growth or by autofill or whatever? And what is the step value? So we want to increase it by 1, by 2, by 5, by 10, by 100. And what is the stop value? So for example, we could go for 250, and if we say, okay, now he filled out this row until 250, you don't need to mark anything, it is done automatically. The same system works also for dates. That means if I'm saying this is the 16th January 2018, I could easily tell him, well, fill it out in a series, but he sees that this is a date format, and now we have the chance of only filling out all the days or on weekdays or every month, the 16th, so 16th January, 16th February, and so on. So it is kind of a nice automation option. Still, you have to be aware if you work with dates or time formats. Excel is working here a little bit different because the first thing is every time you enter a date format, it changes its formatting automatically to date. And that means even if you delete it afterwards, it is handled as a date format. And that means if we now say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he sees the 4 as a date. And due to the fact that Excel saves date format as numbers, he changes this automatically. So Excel has a very, very easy setup for that. And that is, so 1 is the 1st January 1900, 2 is the 2nd January, 3 is the 3rd January, and so on. And that means if we're typing in our date for today, the 16th January 2018, and we want to change that in a numbering format, it's 43,116, and it simply means it's 43,116 days since the 1st January 1900. Times, that means 8 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, noon, are decimals. And that means if I want to make sure that it's today at noon, all I have to do is 0.5. And if I'm now taking kind of a format, we have here kind of different formats, for example, date formats, where we can choose from, or we can have custom formats where we have time and numbering format. We could use proper special or custom formats, and you see it's today at 12 o'clock. So it's as easy as that. Integer numbers are dates and decimals are times. That said, we need to take care that you are aware of another tricky thing, and that is, for example, we know all that we can calculate in Excel. For example, like equals 3 multiplied with 5, and you see here the result, whereas in the line up here, you see the formula. The problem is that if you need to change something within a formula, you need to go inside, double click there, change it, and then go on. In a little bit more complicated formulas, you don't want to click inside and change every aspect anymore. So in my perspective, if you do kind of a formula, it is very important that a formula only refers to cell references. And that means here you can see we're referring to the cell P19 and P18. And the tricky part is that this formula is now a complete formula, no constant numbers anymore inside of the formula. So what we want to do is always refer to cell references. The problem is if we copy and paste this formula, we need to make sure that we understand how Excel copies formulas. If you basically copy a formula with cell references, the cell references by default are relative. That means relatively from this cell with a formula, take the cell 2 above and multiply it with the cell 1 above. That's what he says. Take the cell 2 above and multiply it with 1 above. And that means if we're looking at the copied one, take the cell 2 above and multiply it with 1 above. And that's what a relative path means. We also have the chance of using absolute path, and that means if we say equal, we could refer to this cell, and now either we could move the cell reference with the arrow keys, or by simply clicking somewhere else with the mouse pointer. And we could use dollar signs, because the dollar sign means that we are fixing the information afterwards. So the first dollar sign fixes the Q, and the second dollar sign fixes the 18. So no matter where we copy it, it will not change. Whereas normally if you copy a formula downward, the number changes. If you copy a formula left and right, the character changes. By using those dollar signs, nothing changes anymore. And if we say multiply with this one, there's an easier version of the dollar sign adding, which is the key F4. the function key F4. If you press F4, you get a fixed one. And if we have now our formula with all the dollar signs inside, if we copy this formula by copying it, and if we insert the formula, you see that it always refers to those two cell references up here. And even if you copy the formula to the right, all we need to have is kind of an overview where we reference to. If it is about referencing the register card of formula, and formula auditing is quite nice, because here you could always say, well, where is the information coming from with a trace precedence? So if you go to a cell with a formula, you can tell them, well, where is the information for this formula coming from? And he refers to the cells, and with the remove arrows, you can remove those again. And if you are on a cell with a fixed number, you could tell, well, trace dependent, that means in which formula are you working with this number here. That's kind of a nice option, especially for finding mistakes. You could use that very, very easily. The problem is, of course, if there's a relative path without the dollar signs and an absolute path with the dollar signs, there's a partially absolute path, which means if we only copy it downward, it might be also okay to say, well, this one, and you know, if you press F4, you're getting it absolute, and if you press F4 again, you get it partially absolute to the number, and F4 again partially absolute to the character, and F4 again, you're back to the relative path. So with the F4 key, you can jump through. You could say, well, this one I want to have partially absolute on the number, multiply with this one partially absolute on the character, and now if we're copying downward this, you see that different things happen, and that means if we copy it downward and say trace precedence, we see what changed and what didn't change. And so you're moving downward, and you're moving downward the 5 but not the 3. And perhaps if we move those formulas over here, it's more visible if we do this to which cells we're referring to, and then you see exactly if this was your intent or if this is something differently. Good. Another basic thing is, of course, we have a lot of tasks here, and one of the tasks will be kind of have one formula for all of the yellow cells, and it should be quite aware if we say, well, this is the number of kilometers driven, this is what you get per kilometer. It's a simple multiplication, this multiply with this. If we copy this formula, and I'm not copying it in all of the cells because it gets ridiculous, it is kind of obvious that this is wrong. Except if you know the company, I'm glad to join the company and drive some 300 kilometers now. So the problem is that we know this is wrong, but what happens? And if we copy the formula and copy it in here and say, well, where is it coming from and where is it coming from? You see directly where the mistake happened because he's referring to the wrong cells. So what we need to do is to think about what is allowed to happen, what's not allowed to happen. That means if we copy it downward, this is allowed to move because we want to take care of the proper euro per kilometer. But this is not allowed to move downward. And this one is allowed to move downward, but not allowed to move left and right. So our formula should read kind of this multiply that, and then we might be tempted to click inside now and say, well, the first one should be having its A being fixed and the third one having it 3 being fixed. And with that formula, we could simply copy it. Copying is an easy part because you can drag and drop also, but you can only drag and drop in one direction. So either you drag and drop in that direction, afterwards with the second one, drag and drop it downward, or you simply copy the cell and insert into all of them. Still, you're not done because if everything shows a result, it's up to you to either go to the formula auditing and trace precedence and say, well, where is it coming from? Where are the informations coming from? or to simply check like a 40 cent and 400 kilometers, 160 euro. That should be also done without a calculator. Additionally, we have here kind of a task where we have a buying price, a selling price, a profit before the bonus, a calculated bonus, and a profit after the bonus. So if we copy a profit before the bonus, it's simply selling price minus buying price, and the bonus is calculated out of the profit before the bonus multiplied with the bonus percentage, and the profit after the bonus is a typical profit before bonus minus the bonus. We hopefully we know that this is wrong now, but we still copy it downward. That means if I'm marking all the three formulas, drag and drop it downward, it's obvious that something went wrong. The question is, what went wrong? Well, this formula is hard to get it wrong. This formula, it's hard to get it wrong. So the problem might arise only with this formula. And if we say here, where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? You directly see with the formula auditing that this reference has moved where it shouldn't. So all we need to know is we need to fix the cell reference to K4. That means we're removing the arrows again. We're removing those formulas, and for the K4, we're fixing it. Either fix it absolute, but due to the fact that we're only copying it downward, we could also fix it partially absolute to the character to the number, and at the very end, if we go there, F4 or F4 again for the other version of partially absolute, and then if we click OK, we have the formula, and now we can drag and drop it. And I just wanted to mention, either you mark all of them and drag and drop those formulas downward. You just need to be aware that if there's a lot more rows, like 20, 50, 100,000 rows, drag and dropping it 50,000 rows might take a while, even if it's fast enough, but 50,000 rows could take quite a while until you reach the very end. So what we want to do is have a little bit of an automation, and that is quite easy with Excel. So you mark all your formulas you want to copy, and at the very end there's a little dot in the lower right corner, and if you double click on that one, it fills out the formulas until the very first empty row. No matter if it's 5,000, 50,000, 200,000 rows, doesn't matter. He fills it out until the very first empty row. This bonus percentage is quite easy to achieve. Another thing would be, of course, to see, well, this is the K4. And the cell reference for K4 is an easy part. But what we can do is, of course, we could go to the cell and say, well, this cell, we want to do this cell specially, and we name it bonus percent. So we give this cell a special name. If we do so, we could easily, I'm simply adding another column, version 2, and now we say, well, and equals this multiply with that, and now you see he's directly taking the name of the cell, and by the name of the cell we don't need to mention that we want to put it absolute, because he's always referring to this proper name. The name could also be used by the drop-down list from the formula. There is a list of all the given names that we're using, and if we do so, we simply need to copy it downward, and he's calculating it by saying, well, this one is to be found here, and this one is found here, and this one is found here, and this one is found here. So he knows exactly where this cell is. And the really nice part is, for example, if we are deleting this again, because we want to get rid of it, we don't want to have this bonus percentage here, so I'm cutting it, I'm going to a new sheet, I'm pasting it here, and now here we have our bonus percent, which is the name of the cell, and the bonus percent is here, and we go back to our example, it's no problem at all, equals this, multiply, and as said, we can use it in formulas, so still there is the use of bonus percent, and it knows where to go. The only thing is the trace present then is no longer an option because it only shows that we are referring to another sheet, but not where in the sheet. So it's not that helpful anymore if we are referring to other sheets. But the nice thing is if we go there, we change it to 10% and we go back, everything has already changed. And due to the fact that we cut it's also here updated, and that's nice. But these names are quite okay. Just know that these need to be unique names. That means I can't have kind of another cell here also named bonus percent, but this has the option of having a sheet where you tell the people, well, I'm collecting here all the fixed numbers and referring to them with the proper name. Good. Thanks for attention. See you again next time.